Can you dig your man? He's a righteous man. Welcome back to Drunk on Writing, and now the 8th episode of the special Stephen King series of dissections. Today, we're talking about one of Stephen King's most beloved books, The Stand, along with its 2 adaptations, the 1994 ABC TV miniseries and the more recent Marvel Comics series. There's a lot to digest here, and since this is one of King's longest novels to date, this might end up being a bit of a long episode, but I'll be sure to break it up as usual and insert the time codes in the description below. Plus, we'll break it up with a little beer break and just have some fun. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Drunk on Writing YouTube channel if you haven't already. And if you're very interested and you want more of these, head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting and sign up there where just a buck, just $1, you can't even get a McDonald's menu item for $1. Just $1 will get you 1 week early access to every Drunk on Writing episode, and a few bucks more will get you a whole mess of goodies. So, in the essence of time, let's dive right in. Every version of The Stand that we're going to talk about today, the book, the TV show, and the comic, is broken up into different acts. The book has 3, Captain Trips, On the Border, and The Stand. The TV show has 4, The Plague, The Dreams, The Betrayal, and The Stand. And the comic has 6, Captain Trips, American Nightmares, Soul Survivors, Hard Cases, No Man's Land, and The Night Has Come. Despite breaking the narrative a little differently each time, each version of The Stand tells the same basic tale, which makes sense given Stephen King had a hand in every single one of them. He obviously wrote the novel, he wrote the teleplay for the TV show, and he was a creative director for the comic book. Plus, why fix something that isn't broke? Now, the general premise of The Stand was previously touched on in the short story Night Surf, which we covered back in the Night Shift collection. Basically, this superflu with this 99.4% communicability rate is accidentally released from this top secret research base out in California, and as Stephen King puts it, like a deadly chain letter, the most insane, effective chain letter that has ever existed, it spreads. It spreads dramatically, going from California to Texas, all the way up to New York and Maine. All of the United States is basically infected with this flu. And it's not just humans either, it's all of man's best friends. Most importantly, in this book, the dogs. The dogs are affected, which is like super sad. And then some dumbass secret agents in foreign countries go on to infect the other major powers of the world, including Russia, China, I think the UK is mentioned in there, because God forbid it looks like the United States violated the Geneva Convention, right? Yeah, we just gotta take down the world with us. What a bunch of jerks. Chaos ensues, of course. People are mowed down by the police, by the army, as they try to escape, as they try to get information. Information is hushed, suppressed. Freedom of the press is suppressed. People die in hospitals, in their beds. They're dumped by the thousands, but in like truckloads and boatloads out into the sea where nobody can see it, even though they sneak some footage of it. They're just waiting, hoping for a cure, but there is no cure. No cure ever comes. 218 million people die just in the US. That's a lot of people. This is the flu to end all flus, and we get all sorts of nicknames for from A prime to tube neck to choking sickness. Is there any others? Super flu. But the one that sticks, obviously, is Captain Trips. There's no explanation within the book or any of its adaptations as to where that nickname actually came from, why that one is the one that prevailed. But Captain Trips was a nickname for Jerry Garcia, who apparently had a penchant for dropping LSD into people's drinks. So maybe it's called Captain Trips because it boiled people's brains so badly they started to hallucinate? I don't know. But I do like Reddit users The Shallow Drowns explanation a whole hell of a lot. He or she said, "I've always assumed it is a direct reference to Jerry Garcia because a superflu would make you grateful to be dead. But this story isn't called Captain Trips or Superflu or Tube Neck or any of that. Because while that is a very important part of this story, it's not the entire book. It's not the entire film. It's not the entire comic. Because the bulk of this tale is about what happens after the flu, after the destruction, after the deaths, both flu and non-flu alike. It's particularly about the journey of our characters, our core cast of characters. A journey that is, at least in part, inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, you know, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and whatnot. And those are referenced several times throughout the book. But it's about our characters, you know, surviving, coming together, reestablishing civilization, a better civilization, taking everything that they thought was the best part of civilization before and reinstituting it, you know, adopting the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, doing all that and trying to remake America, basically, in this new age. Oh, and, you know, making a stand against this Freddy Krueger-like bad dude who is haunting their dreams. A guy who goes by the name of the Walking Dude, the Dark Man, Randall Flagg. Described by King in the book as a tall man of no age in faded peg jeans and a denim jacket, who has the face of a hatefully happy man, a face that radiated a horrible, handsome warmth, a face to make water glasses shatter in the hands of tired truck stop waitresses, to make small children crash their trikes into board fences and then run wailing to their mommies with steak-shaped splinters sticking out of their knees. That's a hell of a description, and I also like this little bit of description as well. He was a clot looking for a place to happen, a splinter of bone hunting a soft organ to puncture, a lonely lunatic cell looking for a mate. And in the TV adaptation where he's played by Jamie Sheridan, he's basically evil Jay Leno. Quick aside about Flagg, this is his first true appearance, but he may have been referenced in some of Stephen King's earlier works, and he would go on to be pretty much an important character in several other stories by Stephen King, most notably the Dark Tower series. But we'll get to all those another day. Now, aside from Flagg and his as opposite as can be counterpart Mother Abigail, the personification of good in this story, God's little servant, who has a face that Stephen King describes as one seamed with a million wrinkles like the map of a state where the geography hasn't settled, because she's obviously billed as the oldest woman in America. We also have a relatively small, you know, core cast. On the good side, we have Nick, Larry, Franny, and Stu. And then you can probably toss in Tom, Glenn, and Ralph, and let's not forget about Kojak. You cannot forget about Kojak. And then on the other side, on Randall Flagg's side, we have Harold, Nadine, Lloyd, and Trash Can Man. Franny is the sort of tough as nails, but oh so lovable gal everyone's probably run into at one point or another, while Larry is the kind of narcissistic, talented, womanizing asshole you wish you could love, but you kind of can't help but hate him for squandering his lucky break. He's a taker, and he ain't no nice guy, as Stephen King points out repeatedly. And Stu is probably exactly who I wish I could say I was in tough situations. He's the Rick Grimes of this group, except Stu's a bit less prone to monologuing. And I guess you can sort of say the same about Nick, who's the deaf mute, the heart of the group, who gets, unfortunately, blown to smithereens by destiny-embracing Harold and horribly manipulated Nadine in a not-so-surprising bit of betrayal. But don't worry, they both get their comeuppance, even though Harold's kind of feels a little too anticlimactic to me. But I think that's kind of the point of it all. He was just used, abused, and thrown aside because he had served his purpose, and he was kind of a dick who wants a dick on their side. And as anyone who's read or seen The Stand, you already know that Nick isn't the only one to meet his maker after coming face to face with a bomb. Because in the end, after we've established the good world over in Boulder and the bad world over in Vegas, because of course it's in Vegas, right? It was either Vegas or Reno. It's going to be one or the other. After we have done all that, after dozens of chapters of character growth, introspection, development, I mean, this book is a masterclass in character development. It is just stupendous what he does. Larry, in particular, has one of the best character arcs I have ever read. It's just phenomenal what Stephen King does with him. And with all of the characters, really. And I guess, you know, the character descriptions that I just gave a minute ago are completely worthless, really, by the end of the book. But, you know, if I was going into him, I need a whole series just on that, which is probably a good idea, and probably somebody has already done that. Link me if you know about that. But after all of that, and after sending spies that seemingly serve no purpose other than to be cannon fodder, after sending our 4 main leads, Stu, Larry, Glenn, Ralph, Nick's already dead at that point, obviously. After sending them to seemingly their deaths to make their stand against Randall Flagg, this whole story is wrapped up by a present from Trash Can Man. An atom bomb detonated by the hand of God. God, by the way, and I know I already mentioned God a little earlier, whether I was about to say him, but it could be a her. God is a real dick in this story, and definitely a real presence. Now, this is not lovey-dovey New Testament God. This is wrathful, vengeful, killer God from the Old Testament. I mean, it's heavily implied that God is the reason that the plague started in the first place. You know, though he speaks through Mother Abigail, this lovable old woman who sits in a rocking chair and just plays her guitar, there's a good chance that it was God's actions that led to 99.4% of the world's population dying. Because who needs a flood when you've got the U.S. military, right? I guess at least he left Stu and Kojak alive at the end. I guess he's sort of benevolent, he's sort of kind, I suppose. Though I have to ask, was any of it really worthwhile? Was killing all these people necessary? Because at the end, in the uncut story of the book, in the uncut version of the book, in the comic book, the TV show is based on the cut version, which we'll talk about in a minute. Evil is reborn in the uncut. Randall Flagg is reborn. He comes back. So evil is reborn despite all these best efforts, despite these sacrifices. So what was the point of this stand? As noted repeatedly throughout the book, all the stuff that brought humanity to the point that we are right now, and right at the beginning of the book, all the nuclear warheads, all the guns, all the pollution and everything, it's all still there. It's all still available. We can just walk and go get it. And it's a convenience. All of that's still there. All the stuff that made the world a horrible place, that was slowly killing the world, it's all still there. And it's probably going to be used again. And even in our good world of Boulder, at the end of the book, they're starting to revert to the old ways. We're starting to get an armed militia policing the population. So what did all this really accomplish? I guess maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe there was a big fat reset. But I don't know. There's this one passage between Nick and Mother Abigail I think really kind of plays into the ending and kind of helps explain what the role of all the characters and what the point of this whole story was. It's one of the dreams that Nick has early on, and in it, he asks Mother Abigail, "How do I get out of this?" And she answers, "God bless you, boy, but no one ever does." Yeah. I think it's time we had that beer. I wanted to pick up a bottle of Rogue Farms Chipotle whiskey for this video, but I just couldn't find a bottle. Why that one? Because if you notice in the book, Randall Flagg seems to have a penchant for picking aliases that start with R and F, and Rogue Farms starts with R and F. Not that I'm saying Rogue Farms is his distillery, is his brewery, his farm. But I guess you never really know, do you? But I got this beer instead. 10 Barrel Brewing's Apocalypse IPA. A West Coast style IPA with a 6.5% ABV. Its simple look and kind of bold lettering really stood out to me on the shelf, and I just had to kind of pick it up. And there was a little bit of merchandising that really grabbed me here. It was Apocalypse is made for those of us that go big and then celebrate with a cold beer. Seems appropriate, right? According to the brewer notes on this one, 10 Barrel uses a combination of whole leaf and pellet hops to create this flavor, which is pretty fruity, citrusy, definitely some lemon in there, maybe with a touch of pine, the typical kind of IPA flavors. There's also a lot of malt. There's a heavy sense of malt, rich malt. You can see the color is like a deep gold or so. And it's got a great mouthfeel. Not too thin, not too heavy, but just kind of like, like the Goldilocks right there, right in the middle. It's pretty good. And to me, I want to say this is a drinking beer through and through. You know, this is not something that you're probably going to want to have while you're eating. This is hey, I'm going to have a sit on my porch and have a beer. That's what this is. And while I don't think I'd call it anything of a standout, it's really drinkable. And I could definitely see this being a staple in your fridge. And I think it's just the thing to help me wash down the Stand. So speaking of the Stand, let's get back to that. King delves into the origins of the Stand in his non-fiction books, Dance Macabre, which I don't plan on covering in this series, but is definitely worth a read. In that book, he notes a number of inspirations for the Stand, including the Patty Hearst case. She was kidnapped, raped, and basically brainwashed by the Simeonese Liberation Army, which she ended up joining. George R. Stewart's novel Earth Abides, a story, shockingly, about a plague wiping out the majority of humanity, and, as I noted earlier, The Lord of the Rings. Only instead of a hobbit, King wrote, my hero was a Texan named Stu Redman, and instead of a Dark Lord, my villain was a ruthless drifter and supernatural madman named Randall Flagg. The land of Mordor, where the shadows lie, according to Tolkien, was played by Las Vegas. Now, there are 3 versions of The Stand, the novel, to date. There's the original hardcover version, published in 1978, with the story set in 1980, the first paperback version, published in 1980, with the story set in 1985, and the complete and uncut edition, published in 1990, with the story set that same year. That last version is the one that you would pick up today if you went to the bookstore and bought a brand new copy, or if you ordered off Amazon a brand new copy. What that version was Stephen King going back and fixing a few errors, adjusting some cultural references, removing stuff from like references to Stu being in Vietnam, which at that point in 1990 wouldn't really make sense. And I think most importantly, that version also restored a bunch of text that was left out of the 1978 version. As King explains in the preface to that edition, this version of The Stand is an expansion of the original novel. Approximately 400 pages of manuscript were deleted from the final draft. The reason was not an editorial one. The cuts were made at the behest of the accounting department. In essence, the production cost and the cover price that would have been required to bring King's original version of The Stand to market at that time in 1978 were just too high. I mean, this was his 4th novel, not counting, the Richard Bachman piece, and his other stuff were considerably shorter. So it all kind of makes sense. Now, good thing here, King was offered the choice to make his own edits. And that's important. And King said yes. He decided to do the surgery, as he called it himself, which I think I probably would have done too. I mean, that's your book. You know it through and through. You know the stuff that is important, you think, but is generally probably not as important to the plot. And that version, that cut version, that edited version is what was released in 1978. Fast forward 12 years, though, and the market's a bit different. King's a bit different. People want King. They want as much King as they can get. So, they were able to bring the uncut version back. But it wasn't the original version anymore. This was not King's original draft. Even this complete and uncut version. As, again, King notes in the preface, I haven't restored all 400 of the missing pages. There is a difference between doing it upright and just being downright vulgar. Some of what was left on the cutting room floor when I turned in the truncated version deserved to be left there, and there it remains. So, what was restored then? I have a pretty long list, so I'm going to read it out now to just give you an idea of just how much he added back in here. So, new to the complete and uncut version, and left out of both the original hardcover and the original paperback version, we got the prologue, we got Larry taking money from his mother, Franny's confrontation with her mother, which is, that's a particularly good one, I'd say, a good reinsertion there. The chapter where Randall Flagg gets a car, Nick's fight with Ray Booth where he gets his eye gouged, which was apparently explained away with a car in the original version, a car crash, as was the zoo chapter, which that's new as of the uncut version, and that was also explained with another car crash. We get more background for the trash can man, including the somewhat controversial section involving the kid, who was changed to an old man in the original version, who ended up having a heart attack pretty early on. We got Nadine's scene where she plays with the planchette, more details about Abigail Fremantle's origins, Several of my favorite sections and chapters, including more from the military's perspective, more details about how the plague affects people across the country, and the No Great Loss chapter, which focused on people who survived Captain Trips but, died in other ways. Some of the extra details during Tom and Stu's traveling time, including, when they watched a movie. The epilogue. Did I mention the tornado? I think the tornado was new. All of that was new as of the uncut version. There were also 13 or so illustrations by Bernie Wrightson, co-creator of Swamp Thing, thrown in there for good measure. This version, the complete and uncut version, is what I read today for this dissection. But I don't know if I should have. Because I didn't really like it all that much. I think I probably should have read the cut version, which kind of hurts me to say. Because I think the book just kind of dragged on far too long. Okay, just hear me out here. Like I said earlier, the book has 3 acts. Captain Trips, On the Border, and The Stand. That first section, Captain Trips, focuses on the spread of the plague and its immediate aftermath. And the third section, The Stand, focuses on our ragtag team of heroes going up and making their stand against Randall Flagg. Those sections fly by. They were captivating. But the middle section, On the Border, not so much. And On the Border is the longest part of this book. It was also the part that had the most put back in the complete and uncut version. And it just drags. It just goes on. And there's so much that happens here that doesn't really push the plot forward. It just kind of... There's a lot of political stuff. There's stuff about the committee. There's a lot of information about people getting together. And it's just kind of, that middle section where it's like, oh, that's great. Get on with the point. I mean, this section is 527 pages long in the hardcover version of the uncut. That's pretty much half of the entire book. And until we get to the part where Harold and Nadine do their thing and make everybody go boom, again, there's not a whole lot that goes on there. There's character development. This is a master class in character development. This is where we get our character's growth. But it's basically a bunch of talking heads. And that doesn't necessarily make for the most entertaining read. It's certainly interesting, but I think Stephen King and the publisher may have been right in cutting some of these sections to make this portion of the story go by a little bit faster. Now, it's worth noting that both the TV show and the comic adaptation of The Stand both heavily truncated this section. They don't completely gloss over it, but they say, hey, they're meeting, let's move on to something else. Hey, this thing is happening here, but let's move on to something else. They make it kind of fly by and they make it work better as a whole. Though there are some, problems by cutting some of that. Some of the character motivations, some of the relationships are a bit lost, especially in the TV show, as we'll get to that again in a couple minutes. But there's another thing lost in those cuts, though. Something that the TV show and the comic don't really touch on is the connection of The Stand to The Shining. As Mother Abigail says, prophecy is the gift of God and everyone has a smidge of it. My own grandmother used to call it the shining lamp of God, sometimes just the shine. I think it's heavily implied that everyone who has survived the plague, everyone who's left who we're following in the story, has a touch of the shine. And honestly, this section, this built-out book 2, which I know I said is a bit of a chore to get through, but this section really kind of cements this book as a sequel to The Shining, albeit one without any of the original characters from that story and not in the exact same setting, though it is in Boulder, which was mentioned in The Shining. That's where Jack goes. And that whole area was mentioned in the earlier novel about being like a nexus of energy of some sort. Speaking of The Shining, I know I got a lot of flack when I said that book just did not work for me. A lot of people place The Stand as their favorite Stephen King book. I don't think I can say the same. It's definitely up there just because of the character interactions, the descriptions of the plague. The whole thing works really well. But this middle section really kind of took me out of it. It made me a little bit bored. And I think And I've read other books where I know that that doesn't happen. You know, It is a perfect example where I don't think we have this kind of churning page count in the middle of the story. It's been a while since I've read that one. I'm looking forward to reading that one again soon. But I just don't think that this is the best of the bunch. There's just too much that feels like padding in this book. Too many sections where it doesn't feel like the characters are making a stand, but Stephen King is making his stand against technology and the modern world and the modern crap that is life, at least life in 1978, 1990 or so. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to read what Dick Ellis says, where he says, maybe the old ways are best. Or when Larry is wondering about how clean and fresh the air smells, despite all these deaths that just happened and all the rotting corpses that are surrounding him, he knows that, you know, the air smells better than it ever has before. And Stephen King himself recently on Twitter noted how much he hates technology. So it's not a real stretch to see that this is kind of a rail against that. And he's written other stories about going against technology. You know, Cell, they come right to mind. But despite all that, despite how groan-worthy that is, and despite me railing on it, there are some sections of The Stand that are just impeccably brilliant. They're just so well done. And I think that's what brings people back to this book in their mind as being so good. Particularly those standalone chapters that I mentioned, those are amazing. I loved reading those. And Larry's journey through the Lincoln Tunnel, I read this book years back for the first time. And I only recently drove through the Lincoln Tunnel. And the entire time I was driving through there, I was thinking back to Larry's journey. That is effective writing there if I make that connection years apart. That was some truly memorable, horrifying writing. And that's what sets The Stand so high up in the catalog of Stephen King's books. Like I said at the front, there have been 2 adaptations of The Stand, at least to date, and worth talking about. The 1994 ABC miniseries directed by Mick Garris with a teleplay by Stephen King, and the Marvel Comics series released from 2008 to 2012, written by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa with art by Mike Perkins and Laura Martin. The miniseries won 2 Primetime Emmys and was nominated for a few others, as well as a Screen Actors Guild Award and, you know, a number of other things. But the award that I want to point out today is especially important because it was for Lynn Kressel, casting director for The Stand. She won a Casting Society of America award for Best Casting in a TV miniseries, it was absolutely well-deserved because including Gary Sinise, who'd win us all over that same summer as Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, The Stand had one hell of a cast. Some of the other notable roles included Molly Ringwald as Franny Goldsmith, whose portrayal isn't entirely in keeping with the book, but it brings a good name to the miniseries, and that's really what was needed there. Laura San Giacomo as Nadine. You might recognize her from Just Shoot Me, and also as an absolute inspiration for Game of Thrones' Khaleesi. Ossie Davis as Judge Ferris. Miguel Ferrer as Lloyd Henry. You might recognize him from Iron Man 3. One of the more inspired choices, Matt Frewer, aka Max Headroom, as Trash Can Man. Ray Walston, or as I know him, Boothby, playing Glenn Bateman. Rob Lowe as Nick Andros. And Bill Fagerback, stealing the show as Tom Cullen. He was pretty much born to play this role and has one of the most heartfelt, emotional lines in the entire miniseries when he says, "I wish I wasn't retarded," or something along those lines. And it's just, his delivery is so perfect. You just melt with it. And there are also a bunch of fantastic cameos, including the perfectly cast Ed Harris as General Starkey, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the Monster Shouter, Kathy Bates surprising as Ray Flowers, Sam Raimi as Bobby Terry, Ken Jenkins as Peter Goldsmith, John Landis as Russ Dorr, Jeff Goldblum, yes, the Grandmaster himself, as a radio announcer, and even Stephen King doing his best impersonation of Alfred Hitchcock when he plays a surprisingly extended role as Teddy Wyzak. So yeah, that is one hell of a cast. The series itself, though, it's not bad. And in a lot of ways, it's actually pretty good, pretty amazing, actually. but it's certainly a product of its time, complete with cheesy music, bad CGI, particularly around Flag, who sort of melts into his devil form far too often. Oh, and there's definitely some questionable fashion choices, including Harold's amazing gimp suit of a motorcycle outfit. But right off the bat, The Stand has some great scenes. Like its opening credits, which play over panning shots of dead scientists and Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper, which sadly does not have enough cowbell, or a fake flu commercial used to stem the panic. And further on in the series, going back to Stu being so much like Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead, his escape from the hospital, from the CDC, is a straight up template for The Walking Dead's first episode. Oh, and let's not forget Larry's run through the Lincoln Tunnel. Like in the novel, this run in the series is brilliant. It's just so well done. But it's not just all big moments. There are also some little subtle things, like Nick holding Tom's chest during the national anthem. That was so sweet. Like I said, there are a lot of great scenes, but there probably could have been more. I mean, like I said before, the TV show is based on the cut version of the novel instead of the uncut. But you kind of got to let them have that one, because there's only so much you can do with a time allotment, And really, it doesn't really hurt the film except for in a couple places, particularly in the middle section, that on the border from the book. The way it glosses over it in the TV show, for the most part, it's great. But there are a few references, a few relationship developments. Larry and Lucy's relationship just comes out like that. Even my wife comments on it and said, wait, they're a couple now? When did that happen? The problem is, on the TV show, there's seemingly no passage of time other than the captions. There's no reference to anything. None of the characters physically change at all, except for Larry getting a random pop-up beard toward the end. I mean, Harold doesn't even start out fat. He's just skinny old Harold. He's a creepy little dude. So there's no real effect that the plague, that this end of humanity seemingly has on the cast of characters, which, again, you can only do so much with actors and a limited budget. Now, there's been talk of there being a new TV version or film version of The Stand coming out. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it, whether it's, a 9-part TV series like the ABC one, or if it's a 3-part epic film trilogy like Lord of the Rings, which would bring it back full circle and would just kind of be amazing if we got there. I think we should get there with the success of something like it. But let's not talk all hypotheticals, because we have another great adaptation of The Stand in the comic book form. In the comic book, it doesn't need to worry about actors. It doesn't need to worry about time constraints. It doesn't need to worry about a budget. They can show whatever they want in comics. That's what makes comic great. You can show outer space. You can show big explosions. You can show characters changing and morphing over time. All you have to do is move the pencil a little bit. So the comic book version adapts the uncut version of The Stand rather than the cut version, except to keep the pace moving a bit better than in the book and to prevent needing, 500 issues. Certain things are still cut and certain things are shortened. For the most part, this works really well for the comic, especially how it handles book 2. A lot of that is handled in just captions, and it's done in a matter of pages. It's really, really exceptional. But it did leave us with a few inconsistencies, like Dr. Soames missing his intro, but acting as though we've already met him later on, or Kojak's supposed big return, even though we were never told he was left behind. There are a bunch of random little things like that, but they don't really outweigh the comic's strengths, of which there are many. I mean, aside from its quick pace, it's really easy to follow, and probably was easier to follow in floppy form, the monthly format, because in collected form, some of the chapters kind of bleed together, and you're kind of questioning it. Why is this here when it should be over there? Why is it breaking up this section? But in floppy form, I'm sure it was perfectly well executed. And the comic actually improves on a few scenes from the book that were a bit questionable. Notably, the Harold Nadine bomb building scene, which brings a different dynamic in the comic book. And the kid, who, maybe because he's such a comic book character in himself, or perhaps because a certain violent rape is a bit glossed over in the comic, is vastly superior to his portrayal in the book. What might help the comic the most is that we're able to explore some of the scenes with not so conventional art. And even when we're looking at it through conventional art, the comic can do things that the TV show could not. It can capture the imagination, the images that were in our head when we were reading the book better than a film can. A really good example is Appendix Mark, who in the comic book looks like an alien jumped from his chest. And it's like, yeah, no wonder he died there. I mean, it's graphic, but yeah, okay, that makes sense. The scene where Stu is escaping from the CDC, that's depicted in the comic book as a labyrinth. That was just a brilliant way to do it. There's a double-page spread of the Trash Can Man's introduction where you can see the full extent of the destruction that he's wrought on this area. And there's another 2-page spread when Nick and Tom are escaping the volcano. You can see kind of Flag's face staring down at them from the clouds. That's not something that you can get effectively from a TV show. And the book's heavy use of blacks is especially welcome, and it really brings something to the story, as it, along with the use of captions, makes like the Lincoln Tunnel episode horrifying in a way the movie just couldn't. We see it in pitch black. And that issue, because of that, is probably the best of the entire series, alongside the issue which introduces Randall Flagg, which is actually juxtaposed against the spread of Captain Tripp. So his arrival within the series brings an even heavier weight to the story. And I want to give a special shout out to the comics depiction of Kojak, who I didn't really mention a whole lot when I was talking about the book, but he has some of the most important roles in the entire story. He saves Stu. He brings Stu back. His just faces when he's on a panel they're just right up there with some of the greatest comic book dogs, and I just ate them up. Is there anything else to say about the adaptations? Probably. There's probably a whole lot that I'm forgetting to talk about right now because they're really well done. But I will say that I don't think they would stand. I don't think they would stand on their own without reading the novel. I think there's just a whole lot lost in the translations that that just wouldn't make sense to you if you haven't read the original version. Now, maybe if they ever do a new take on it, maybe they will solve the riddle. But if not, at least we have one of the greatest novels of all time, right? This has been a long episode, I know, so I'm going to make this closing note a little quick one. But I just want to ask, whose stand was this? Was it good against evil? Was it the Boulder Free Zone, especially the 4 at the end, making their stand against Flagg? Or was it Flagg's stand against God? Or God's stand against us? The characters stand against themselves? Against the old ways? Perhaps all of the above. It's said within this book that we're all captains of our own souls. But how true is that really? We can make our stand, sure. But in the end, does that really all matter? Are we all just stuck? Can none of us ever truly break free? Some stuff to think about. But this has been Drunk on Writing's dissection of The Stand. As I said at the top, if you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to the Drunk on Writing YouTube channel or head on over to patreon.com/drunkonwriting where you can help make more of these possible. Next time, we will be talking about The Long Walk, the second of the Bachman novels. But until then, cheers and keep on writing.